From Vermont Public, this is The Frequency. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. It's Tuesday, July 1st, and here are today's headlines. A new law goes into effect today that increases the amount of money cottage food businesses can make before they have to apply for a commercial license. The law is aimed at bakers and small food producers who sell at farmers markets and local stores. Peter Hopkins makes mustard and hot sauce from his home kitchen in Pownell and says the change allows small businesses to grow before having to move out of their home kitchen.
It's going to allow people to sell more, allow them to grow their business, and be able to allow them the opportunity, if they wish, to make that jump to a commercial kitchen.
The so-called cottage food law raises the annual income from $10,000 to $30,000. With summer settling in and temperatures rising, the health department is urging Vermonters to be on the lookout for cyanobacteria blooms. The toxic algae blooms are usually green or blue-green, and they can make water look more like pea soup or spilled paint. Swimming or wading in water where the cyanobacteria bloom can cause skin rashes, diarrhea, a sore throat, stomach problems, or more serious health issues. Officials warn that pets and children are especially vulnerable. The health department maintains an online cyanobacteria bloom tracker to monitor water safety across the state. Vermont health officials say they're uncertain about their recommendations for COVID shots in the fall because of a lack of direction at the federal level. State epidemiologist Meredith Plumb says her office is in a, quote, wait-and-see position because a special federal advisory immunization committee has failed to issue new guidelines. Recently, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. replaced all 17 members of the panel. Plumb says Vermonters who are due to get a COVID vaccine this summer should do so, but everyone else needs to wait for the new guidelines to be released.
And unfortunately, they didn't vote last week. So we don't have a recommendation for this fall yet, but we're looking closely for any updates that come.
Plumb says the state has been assured that private health insurance companies will cover COVID vaccines through the rest of 2025. And Windsor is celebrating the opening today of 25 new affordable housing units downtown. The Central and Main apartment building is located on a previously vacant site that was donated to housing groups. 6 of the apartments are designated for households exiting homelessness, and they include supportive services. A total of $14.5 million was raised from a mix of public and private sources for the project. A grand opening ceremony is scheduled for today. And coming up, in our continuing series on class, we hear from an East Montpelier resident who talks about people who've benefited from having parents wealthy enough to help them financially into adulthood. That's after this.
Thanks for listening to The Frequency, where support comes from Alpine Telehealth, offering telepsychiatry solutions for Vermont hospital, community mental health, and primary care. Physician-owned and operated since 2018. Learn more at alpinetelehealth.com.
Sharon Plumb works for a statewide nonprofit in the outdoor recreation sector. She lives in East Montpelier with her husband and daughter. In this installment of our occasional series, What Class Are You?, Sharon talks with Vermont Public producer Erica Heilman about the advantages she sees in the lives of people whose parents are able to help their kids financially all the way into adulthood.
I grew up in Washington, Vermont, which is a little town, a few towns over from here. And I had 2 parents, and they were both, one was a teacher and one worked for the state. And they had both come from low-income situations themselves, my mom especially. Generational poverty, I think, was her background. And I think that helped shape my parents' perspective on finances a little bit, that they had made their own way to college and put themselves through college. We had the expectation, like, you will go to college, so that it was not an option. And the kind of conversations we had were a pretty quiet family. There wasn't a lot of conversation, but if there was, it was around doing good in the world. And so by the time I'd seen my sisters go through college and I went to college, my values were pretty deep about caring for the earth and doing good for the world, as opposed to trying to find a way to make money. I got a degree in natural resources, and I led bike tours, I led hiking holidays, I did a bunch of environmental education jobs, and I appreciated that lifestyle until I wanted to become a NOLS instructor. And I remember distinctly looking at what it would cost. And it was
NOLS is an outdoor leadership.
National Outdoor Leadership School. And I think I needed to get like a wilderness first responder and pay for a training program, and probably $3,000 or something, which I remember talking to the intake person, and they just said, well, just ask your parents. That's when I finally put two and two together, that this is something a lot of parents do for their adult children, even their children through elementary, high school, college, and adult children. I didn't understand in my 20s and even into my 30s that for a lot of people, if they didn't have to pay for college, and my parents did help me for sure, but I still had a lot of debt. If they pay for college, if they pay for a first car, if they buy a house, any of those things for you, it takes a generation to make up for that. And if you're both, if you're making the same salary as somebody who's already ahead in that regard because they don't have a student loan, or they don't have as many car payments, or their mortgage is really low or non-existent, then if they're making their $35,000 in their nonprofit world and you're making your $35,000, they can still afford to go out for lunch and go out for dinner and do a lot of things. Whereas I'm a really good budgeter and I did really well and I'm a good saver. But that $35,000, whatever's extra after the necessities, it takes years to, maybe a lifetime, to have that extra. And you start to feel defeated a little bit by not having the same opportunities. And I think that's where my life started to, it came to a point when I was struggling with infertility. And the options available to me were so fewer than people who can afford multiple chances at IVF or who can go for surrogacy. And those options were given to me by the medical providers. But then if you uncover the cost, you're like, well, where would I come up with whatever it was at the time, $14,000 for IVF with a 6% chance? And it took our life savings to adopt. And I would never, ever choose anything else than what we did. But it took our life savings to do that. And again, we know, I don't want to trade my life. I love my life. And I feel incredibly lucky for all of the advantages that I have. But it can be a big struggle to make ends meet. I live in a house that's 1,200 square feet. It's a little bit too small for our lifestyle and the three of us. Our taxes are getting to the point where it's unlivable for us. On paper, it looks like I don't know what class you'd put us in. On paper, it looks like there's plenty, but, and by plenty, there is. We're not hungry. But it feels almost impossible to get ahead, even if you have master's degrees and professional jobs and you're at management level. And some of that's we've made a choice. Like I'm working half-time and I have an Airbnb to make ends meet. And we did that by choice so that one of us would be available before and after school for my kiddo and not make our home life so stressful. That's a privilege, and I know that.
What can be hard? Where does class or financial difference show up in social exchanges?
People feel safer and more understood with people that are kind of in the same boat. And when you're not in the same boat, it can feel really imbalanced. I've been in conversations where the one person was just telling me that they've had to start going to the food shelf, and the other person is now embarking on a big conversation about the $5,000 sauna they just built. Like, how do you say, like, this is a really imbalanced conversation? And I think what would help people in our small rural Vermont communities, where there is such a wide diversity of people's experiences generationally with money, what resources they have, what fears and challenges they have with money, is if people could just be a little bit more curious and more sensitive about the people around them and where they have come from.
This is Erica Heilman with Vermont Public.
Thanks for listening to The Frequency today. We had additional reporting from Howard Weiss-Tisman, Mark Davis, and Bob Kinzel. Today's episode was edited by Mark Davis, and our music is by Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. Talk to you tomorrow.